Welcome into another episode of Three True Values Big Board. I'm your host, James Fletcher. Alongside me is Derek Lewis, good friend of the pod, back to talk some NBA hoops with us. We are going to be previewing the offseason for these NBA teams as we start to move towards that conversation. We've got, of course, the NBA draft coming up in just over a month. We have free agency after that, and then everybody starts to get ready for the next season. This is where we get real excited. Hope always prevails during the offseason. Only a couple teams left that can convince themselves they can win a championship this year, but everyone in theory can convince themselves about next year. On this week's episode, we're going to be going through the Southeast division teams. Yes, these divisions, they still exist, even though they don't really matter in the NBA. We are going to be talking about the Washington Wizards, who get the number one pick in this draft, the Hawks, the Heat, the Hornets, and the Magic, all of them already eliminated. So we can turn our attention to the offseason. Derek, thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to give out false hope. I
Yeah.
love to give out false hope. It's
Yeah.
my favorite thing to do.
Well, that's kind of the point of offseason in sports. And so let's get into it. Let's start talking about the Washington Wizards because they win the draft lottery. They move or stay at number one after having the worst regular season record this past year. They will pick number one in this upcoming draft. They also have second round picks at 51 and 60. So the very end of this draft, they'll get back on the board. Of course, it's a 2 day system in the NBA draft now, but we really need to lock in and focus on this number one pick, I think, because this is a team that will go through their roster more and more, but this number one pick is what they've been waiting on. It's the first time that they can really build up hope that they can turn this organization around. And it's a loaded draft class that they get to pick from.
Yeah, I think the Washington Wizards, more than any team that was in the lottery, well, maybe the Utah Jazz, are really set up with a nice mix of young talent, and adding this key cornerstone piece is going to benefit them greatly. I mean, obviously, adding the top of this draft to any team is going to benefit any team greatly, but I think the Wizards are really uniquely positioned as they have started to become a well-run organization, having picked up some executive talent from Oklahoma City. Their vision is starting to come to fruition with that all important luck factor that you also need. It can't just be good, smart management. That's the start of it, but you also got to get a little lucky, and they got a little lucky.
Yeah, the Wizards are one of these teams that had already committed that they were going to turn things around next season. You talked about the Jazz, who we'll get to at some point, but they already made trades for Trae Young, for Anthony Davis, trying to put veteran cornerstones, respected veterans in this league around some of the young talent that they had on this roster. Of course, with Keyshawn George, you look at Bub Carrington in the backcourt, Alex Sarr in that front court, Bilal Coulibaly, who's quickly becoming a veteran, but is part of this rotation. One of the young players, Trey Johnson, comes to them last year in the draft. And now you get a chance. AJ DeBonsa is number one on my board. Talked with Jamie Shaw a couple of days ago about him being the number one prospect in this draft. But I think what's more interesting than just talking about the addition of AJ DeBonsa is the chatter that's out there, the rumors that were inevitable given the Jazz coming in at number two. What happened between these two organizations last year, where kind of rumor talk conversation was that the Wizards wanted Ace Bailey. They weren't able to get him because the Jazz took him before he fell into their laps. Well, now everyone is going to project the trade of Ace Bailey and number two for the number one pick. And so I think it's going to be really interesting as we continue through this offseason. Do you rather have AJ DeBonsa, or maybe you can have Darren Peterson and Ace Bailey to keep this rebuild going forward?
I can't believe the tentacles of last year's draft are still, because remember, people thought very heavily that Ace Bailey also did not want to be in Utah. So it's kind of like the drama from that, even though that dissipated during the regular season and for good reason, there was no reason to bring it back up, is kind of imbuing itself into this new draft because of the principal players. If you wanted to have like a rigged talk, you could start yourself with those kind of conspiracy theories right there. Obviously, they wouldn't go anywhere, but that's where you could start. So it's very interesting that just the fallout from last draft is already imbuing itself into the top of this draft.
Yeah. And I think that what it's going to come down to, whether they want to make a deal like that or not. Obviously, you're going to have some personal rivalries there. You took the guy we wanted last year. We're going to take the guy you want this year. But I think at the top of a draft board, you can't get that petty with it. It's ultimately going to come down to a decision on, do we think that those two players are better and more valuable to our franchise than the one player? And this is a group that already has a deep collection of talent, young talent to choose from. And so I'm really interested to see, if you're the Wizards, how much do you go in on winning immediately now that you have this cornerstone piece, no matter who it is that they take at the top of this draft? Because you've got Trae Young, you've got Anthony Davis, both of those players in need of extensions if you are going to commit to them as part of your core. But I think it was really savvy move by this front office to bring them in. Now, what's up in the air is, would you give these guys extensions? I think that I'm in the camp of, you make them kind of prove it, go out there. If they want out this offseason, you now feel like, okay, we've got enough talent in the door. We can part with an Anthony Davis if we can get a package back for him. Hopefully, something more than what we gave up to bring him in when he was more of a distressed asset for Dallas last season. Or do you go ahead and say, hey, we're going to keep everybody happy and we're going to build forward, even though we know giving out big contracts can become detrimental really quick in the NBA today?
Yeah, I just don't see the Anthony Davis, the Anthony Davis piece of this anymore. Obviously, I don't know that he'll get moved this offseason, but I have to feel like he's got to be on his way out, just given his injury history, given his timeline, and given the pieces that they already have in place, especially if they add AJ. I just don't feel like Trae Young. I have my problems with Trae Young's archetype, but he's a playmaking point guard. We can always kind of fit that in, with the defensive talent that they're going to have on their roster now. You can work around it. It's kind of a perfect situation for Trae Young to be in. But for Anthony Davis, given the type of player he is, how he fits, the young talent behind him, I just don't see his long-term fit for this team anymore. And you could say the same thing for Trae Young in a manner of speaking, but at least I know what Trae Young is going to bring to a young team if I decide to give him a new contract. I probably still wouldn't do that, but at least I can see the vision of it.
Right. And so this is a team also that has no real free agents of note in this offseason. So I think they're going to be able to fully kind of lock in and focus on the direction here. 14 players under contract. So we could see some wheeling and dealing. We could see some trades, maybe packaging a couple of players to go get somebody who they think is more of a winning piece now, to make that push towards whether it's the play in or they can make it into the playoffs in the East here. But their needs, when I look positionally, it's interesting because I don't think that they have just a complete lack of depth at any one position. I think what they need is more winning pieces. And so I think that's what's going to be interesting. They can identify which of these young guys has made the steps that they want to see, that has the most potential going forward, and really invest in those guys, and maybe bring in some more veteran pieces, some guys who are known commodities around them as they continue to push towards winning basketball.
I think the Wizards are going to be one of the centerpieces of the offseason, not only because they have the first pick in the draft, but just because they're stocked full of young talent and they're not going to be able to develop all that young talent at once. Like, it's good to have those pieces so that you can move and you can make, any variation of move that you want to make. And they have that now. They have that flexibility, but they cannot bring this entire team back in the way that it is constructed and add AJ DeBonsa or Darren Peterson or Cameron Boozer, whoever they end up adding. That just can't happen that way. So they're going to have to consolidate these assets. It's about how best can they consolidate them and what winning player, as you said, can they bring in to add to this mix of young talent, and then potentially Anthony Davis and Trae Young, depending on what direction they go in that regard. But they're so. I was going over with somebody the other day. They have so many young players that it's kind of like it's kind of an embarrassment of riches in that front. But it's also, again, you just cannot develop that. We saw that we saw that recently with the Spurs. They at his point had so much talent that they have drafted from all these lotteries that eventually Jeremy Sohan had no place. It's
Mhm.
going to be a similar situation with the Wizards to a certain extent, obviously for a little bit of different reasons than what the Spurs dealt with this year, but the same kind of vein and of the problem that they'll have because of all the young talent.
Definitely. Let's move on to the Hawks now, who have the number 8 pick in this draft. Of course, also have number 23 and 57 on the board in the second round. So this is a team with that number 8 pick. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. They got out of the Trae Young business this past year. They end up moving on from Kristaps Porzingis. They get Jonathan Kuminga in the door. And now you kind of start to see this new era where Nickeil Alexander Walker took a major leap forward in his ability to contribute. And I think that that's going to really dictate what they're going to do. Ansi Salah has been raved about as one of the hot names in the front office market for what he's done over these last couple of years, making them bigger, longer, stronger. Obviously, now already pieces being taken off of his GM tree. One of his assistants hired for the Chicago gig at this offseason. So as I look forward, they've got 10 players under contract right now. Jalen Johnson, of course, being the biggest among them. That's the star that they're going to build around. We talked about Nickeil Alexander Walker, his emergence. Dyson Daniels is on that wing. Maybe took a little bit of a step back from what we saw the year before, but still a really good defender who has shown flashes here and there that he can stay on the floor and become an important piece of that offense as well. And then the big question mark, Jonathan Kuminga. What do you do with Jonathan Kuminga moving forward? Obviously, just 1 year left on his contract because of that short-term deal he signed with the Warriors. They've got a lot of directions they can go. CJ McCollum is a free agent this offseason. That's a big cap hold that you have on your books. Do you let him walk as an older guard and find his replacement potentially with that number 8 pick? Or do you view him as a piece that's a veteran kind of core guy who can lead these guys maybe on a smaller contract than what he was on in the past? But what do you think is the most important thing for the Hawks to get done this offseason after really kind of wiping the slate clean and going in this whole new direction that they are this year?
It, they have been trending towards making the right decision. Getting out of the Trae Young business was the right move at the right time. That they were able to. It's funny because it felt like they pulled off that move just in time to kind of salvage their season, and now they have a direction that they can go with in terms of developing the young talent on their roster and seeing where that ceiling is. Because I don't know that we have a good idea of where that ceiling is. Obviously, the eighth pick will loom large here because this is a good draft to have the eighth pick in, and they can go a bunch of different directions with that. They still seem like they need a little bit of big man help, big man depth. The Kristaps Porzingis decision didn't really pay off for them, but had it paid off for them, that would have been a huge deal. So that the fact that they had to get out of that business is something that kind of looms over their future. Obviously, Porzingis wasn't going to be a long-term option regardless, but they need some help in that department. Is Jalen Johnson going to be able to be a go-to scorer in the realm of a superstar that you can bang your hat in day out in the playoffs? He wasn't really that this year,
Mm-hmm.
which is why they ended up going home a little early despite having the talent to. I think the CJ McCollum piece, as you brought up, that's an interesting decision because he brought so much to the table, which when that trade first happened, it was very criticized in terms of like, they're wasting their time, they're spinning their wheels with CJ McCollum. He became a very, very important piece for them. So in a certain way, I almost think that it's just kind of sit back, evaluate who you can get at the eighth pick, add that to your roster, and then let's see what happens. Maybe next offseason is where we would maybe go in, maybe with a bigger move or reset our time label to kind of go all in. They went all in. They went all in for the Trae Young era. It didn't work out. Now they're kind of shifting through the wreckage. I tried to combine rubble and wreckage, and that didn't work out. The wreckage, and honestly, they have some great pieces as they sift through that wreckage. It's good wreckage to have, especially because Joe Dumars and company gifted them with the eighth pick of the draft for really no reason.
Yeah.
So
They are one of these teams that gets mentioned as a sleeper in the Giannis conversation. I don't really see it. I think that the only piece that really they have to go towards that would be Jalen Johnson. And at that point, you're really accelerating your timeline for a team that doesn't feel like it has all the rest of the pieces in place at this point, to our point about what they're going to do, what they're looking for in this offseason. But I do think that this is a big potential offseason for them. I think they can take a couple of swings with that eighth pick. I think what's going to be most fascinating, do they try to get into that point guard mix? We know that most of the mock drafts right now have a run of those point guards coming off the board. I think one of the interesting things, I don't see them going towards a Darius Acuff, towards a Michael Brown when they just got out of the Trae Young business. One of the offense first point guards. Kingston Flemings is a really fascinating one, though, for them. The fit there, the defensive kind of prowess that he has showed at Houston, the size that he has. The wingspan did not check out, so that one is kind of a mark in the other direction. But you can also start talking about, I feel like number 8 is the range where we start to kind of bring up the name Ade Mara. And do they just go fill that center need in the draft, worry about that point guard position or whatever kind of guard they're looking for in that backcourt through free agency? I think that they're in a really good spot with that pick that, like you said, they were gifted in a trade by the Pelicans last season. I just really like where they're at. Of course, they'll have options as well with that mid level exception that they can just fill out this team. And this is something that's a rare situation. We've gone through this whole thing. We haven't even mentioned Zachary Risache. And I know that we didn't talk extensively about Sar when we talked about the Wizards, but for Risache to just not really be part of this conversation, he didn't play really at all down the stretch of the season in the important games for this Hawks team. I think he's going to still be a swing piece for what they can become. Yes, you have a number 1 pick on your roster, and he's not giving you anything much right now, but I don't think he's a lost cause. I think he was always going to be a long-term project. And when they started to accelerate towards winning basketball, I think it did stunt him in his ability to contribute because he's just not at that point yet. Does that mean he won't get there? That's to be determined. But as he continues to catch up, if he can, in his development, I think that's when they can really start to take a leap because you talk about two high end potential guys in that front court.
Well, it's very clear that Quinn Snyder doesn't trust Ricochet to handle the minutes, to handle really any big minutes. Even his rookie year, when he was
Mhm.
kind of coming on at the end of the year, he was kind of making a push for rookie of the year. He was he didn't really log the minutes needed to actually get the award, especially as Stephen Castle came on, because Quinn Snyder just simply did not trust him enough to keep him on the floor in situations that would, quote unquote, pad his stats. And that carried over into this year. But, I think teams need to be leery, especially with how we've seen some of these big wings develop after the fact with getting off of a guy a little too early, especially when you knew he was going to be a project. Denny Avia comes to mind in that regard. I'm not saying Ricochet is going to turn into Denny Avia, but that's just an example of if you sell too early without tapping into the entire development tree, you can find yourself kind of regretting. I guess the Washington Wizards are in good position anyway, but that's not always going to be the case where you can, waste an asset like that and recover. And you always need wings, and we know the Hawks value wings. Like that's their whole modus operandi is to have big long wings and then kind of build out the roster from there. And in today's NBA, it's not a bad strategy at all.
Definitely. Let's talk about the Charlotte Hornets here. I think that they're entering a really pivotal offseason. They kind of hit the accelerator and started to play winning basketball some point during this season. We know Charles Lee. I don't think he gets near enough credit for what he has been able to do with that organization, taking them from kind of the punchline, the perennial loser in the NBA, and starting to work them back up towards the play in, where they got some really valuable experience for LaMelo Ball, for Brandon Miller, Con Knipple. Uh, I think that they've got kind of the core in the backcourt there. We saw Mo Diabate really take a leap forward as a small ball kind of center, real hustle guy. But I think that there's some more questions to sort out in that front court moving forward. And that's where having the 14th and 18th pick is going to be really valuable for this team. Yes, they could sit still and see what centers or what kind of pieces are left on the board for them. But they can also package those and go move up the board and get the guy that they really want before the rush of these guys starts to come off the board. I think that they're in really good spot there in the draft. Of course, 13 players currently on the roster for next season. Their biggest free agent that's out there is Kobe White, who came in and had some big moments for them during that run towards the play-in. So it'll be interesting to see, are they able to bring him back, whether it's on the mid-level exception or they can get something done with a longer-term extension, a little bit bigger deal. Where do you see the biggest leap to be taken by this Hornets team that has started to trend in the right direction?
uh, People are going to learn about me that I'm very much a sit back, do marginal things on the margins and see where your talent is taking you when you're in that position. Obviously, there are different strokes for different folks, but surprisingly, a lot of these teams in this division are somewhat in the same boat, even albeit for different reasons. Where it's kind of time to maybe take another year, assess where everything is at, and then maybe next offseason would be the offseason to strike. But that being said, I'm going to kind of take a big swing here. Is this not where Giannis should want to go? Shouldn't Giannis want to add his talent to this talent? And it's young, but it's young, but it has veterans. It has inside out. It has inside out presence. He has the shooters around him that he needs. He has a playmaking point guard. They're up and coming. They quote unquote don't need him because if you just take the from whatever point they took that got hot till the end of the season, they're like one of the third best teams in the East at minimum or something of that nature. Is this not where Giannis should want to land? It has pretty much everything he needs to be successful.
I think there's an easy counter, which is if you just land in a big market, who cares? People are going to come play with you anyways. That's the easy counter to that. But I do think that the other counter would be how much do they have to give up if they were to get him? Because you're going to have to give up one of these big pieces that we're talking about, that you're mentioning as one of the key reasons that he would want to be there. I think that
Well,
if we were,
let's go
if we
down
were
the hypothetical road
right.
real quick. Who is the what is the biggest piece you feel like they would have to give up without having to give up any of the other pieces? Like who could they give up? Like could they
So
give
they
up a
would
Brandon Miller and not have to give up anything else
I think it would
besides
have to be
draft picks?
Brandon. Right. I think it would have to be Brandon Miller, because Khan, first of all, salary wise, you're not going to be able to get there if it's just Khan.
Right.
LaMelo, I think to your point, they need a point guard on the roster. There's not one if you move LaMelo. So even though I think that he would be probably the best one if you're the Hornets to get rid of, it's just not practical. So Brandon Miller, I think, has to be the guy that you would move in that situation. And then I think you still have to move probably Miles Bridges with him just to make the money work. So you're talking about and obviously the basketball, Miles Bridges and Giannis in the front court together probably doesn't match anyways. So I think it would probably have to be those two and all your draft picks that you have moving forward. And yeah, that would be really fun.
See, I think
It
I
would
do
be,
that.
it would
I
be,
think
I think I would too if I was the Hornets. The question is, we know that Giannis, with that extension looming, is going to have some say.
yeah,
And
obviously.
I'm all for small markets. And he was loyal to a small market. So if the Hornets came to him and made him a real pitch and convinced him that this was the next up and coming team in basketball and he was going to be able to just dominate and win championships, I would love to see it. I think that I think that they really should.
We're selling hope, James.
Everyone should,
Remember,
yeah,
we're selling hope.
everyone should test the waters on Giannis. I just don't see them in that mix, but it's a really fascinating one. And look, they're not the only smaller market team that's going to be brought up. I mean, we're going to talk about the Trailblazers for sure, but the Trailblazers, their in, of course, is that they own the Bucks picks. They have their future assets moving forward, so that's where they can get their foot in the door. If you're the Hornets, I guess that if you're the Bucks, the reason that you would go with that offer would be that you're just betting against the Hornets having success. You maybe you just feel strongly against LaMelo Ball being a winning player. I guess that would be your argument if you are the Bucks. But
Well,
yeah, I think that basketball wise, it would be a really fun fit.
I also just think knowing the lay of the land right now, what player better than Brandon Mauler? I don't know what that would be. What player better than Brandon Miller are you going to get back with the kind of upside that Brandon Miller still has? So just to
Right.
put a bow on that conversation, I just think that it's possible when it's all said and done, Brandon Miller might be the best player in any trade package that they can get
I
along
think
with.
that could definitely be the case. If they don't go the Giannis route, though, um, they got to fill that center position or at least decide on Mo Diabate. I think that Mo is a guy who can be a really impactful center. I do think they should lock him up long term, but I think that he's probably best suited to be one of two centers and have a change up option. Ryan Kalkbrenner showed some good things for them early in the season. But I think if they could bring another piece to that front court, it could really benefit them long term. Let's talk now about the Miami Heat, and we're going to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo here. Yes, I promise we will. The 13th pick they own in this year's draft, 41st in the second round. They also own 12 players currently on the roster, including Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Andrew Wiggins. They're notable free agents. Norm Powell is the big one. That's the decision they're going to have to make. Simone Fontecchio, also a free agent this offseason. Obviously, one of their biggest needs is a point guard. I don't think there's any question about that. With or without a Giannis pursuit, they're going to have to fill that point guard spot because Eric Spoelstra did not trust the Tyler Hero Norm Powell duo down the stretch of this season. It just was not working. They need somebody who can initiate that offense. And so I think that point guard is one that, whether it's with that draft pick or they're going out, if they win or lose that Giannis sweepstakes, I think they have to go find a point guard who can run this system in the meantime while addressing their star pursuit that the Miami Heat have been on for, it feels like, quite some time now, all the way dating back to when they were trying to get into that Damian Lillard race years ago. The Miami Heat, I think it's going to be it's really interesting. We'll start with the Giannis debate here because I think that's going to be the big storyline for the Miami Heat. There is, of course, a path for them to get there. It involves Tyler Hero. It probably involves Khalil Ware, just because what are you doing with Khalil Ware at that point? If you bring in a Giannis to play next to Bam Adebayo, but do the Bucks like anything that the Heat can offer? That's my question when I see their offer paired up next to other offers that are theoretically on the table.
I have a bit of a rant for you right now on the Miami Heat, where it concerns Giannis Antetokounmpo, because we've talked already about these teams who I think are trending in the right direction and they can just stand pat. They can see where they're going. It feels like the Heat are in a perpetual state of stay pat and see where they're going, only because they do it to themselves every year. Where every year we talk about, oh, this player was unhappy. He wants to go to the Heat. We do this whole rigmarole. Pat Riley tries to get him for like 2 cents on the dollar. It doesn't happen because GMs aren't idiots. And so at the beginning of the season, we'd have to depend on Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo to try to carry us to a playoff berth. They fall short of the plane, and then we do the process all over again. And so I don't even know how to assess the Heat because I don't think the Heat know how to assess the Heat. I don't think anyone knows how to assess the Heat besides, oh, maybe they'll get Giannis Antetokounmpo. They're not going to get on Giannis Antetokounmpo because they don't have the assets to get Giannis Antetokounmpo. They didn't have the assets to get Dame Lillard. They have the same assets for the most part, and Giannis Antetokounmpo is worth more than Dame Lillard. So it's silly, but it's like almost all we have to talk about because it's all that they will let be. They won't commit to a vision of just building. Like when they got Dwayne Wade, they committed to a vision of building around Dwayne Wade. They won't really ever do that because they're too busy trying to star chase every off season.
Yeah, it does feel like, how many times have they missed out on the next best guy who would have really improved their roster because they were so far down the road on a trade that wasn't going to materialize, that they weren't able to get over the line? I think that it's become a major hindrance because this is a team that's not going to tank. And now with the new rules, it's not going to benefit them really to tank. So you've kind of run out of runway here. If you were going to kind of tear things down and go get your next star through the draft, that pathway to success is starting to go away with these new rules. So you might as well just keep kind of banging your head trying to get into the play and trying to get to that 6 seed, whatever your ceiling is in that. But really, what is a team of Tyler Hero, Andrew Wiggins, Bam Adebayo doing? I think that they have to make a change this offseason, regardless of what it is. And I think that that puts you in a really bad spot if you start to look desperate to the teams around you in the NBA, because that's when they can get positive value for an asset that might just not be worth that. We're looking at the vastly rumored Ja Morant to the Miami Heat trade. If you strike out on Giannis, your fan base is up in arms that you missed out on another star. You still need a point guard to fill out this team. Well, suddenly, this Ja Morant trade market that looked like it had nothing going on, and there's reports about him being a negative asset. Well, suddenly the Grizzlies go to the Heat and they say, all right, well, we know you need him, so give us some real value here. I just think that you never want to back yourself into a corner that you need to do something during a specific offseason. And it feels like the Miami Heat, each year that they strike out or that they don't get big moves done, there's more and more pressure from that fan base and really created by that front office and put on themselves because they keep telling the fan base that they're going to go get the big star. So while they are always going to be a winner on the margins because they are great at player development, I think that they have really struggled with building the core of the roster because they've got all these pieces that they're just waiting to move for the right guy instead of building a coherent team that can win basketball in 2026 and 27.
Yeah, I think they've become this generation's Dallas Mavericks. You know, for a time period, Mark Cuban was always trying to find the big fish. So he kept tearing rosters down because his entire roster building strategy was to land the big fish. That's not a roster building strategy. That is just trying to do the same thing over and over again with no vision for the future. You want to have a vision for the future that can actually pan out in multiple directions. Like modern NBA roster building is all about flexibility and being able to strike when the iron's hot. And the Miami Heat just have not positioned themselves to do either. You know, they're not even a good limbo team right now. Like the only reason that they might even be effective as a limbo team is because Eric Spoelstra is such a good coach and they are good at development. But just in terms of what they've actually built, they're just not in. They're they're just in the middle of nothing, and that's the worst place to be in the NBA. I'm not even saying that as like making the playoffs every year is not desirable. I'm saying that as in they have no vision or direction. That's the middle they're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely the problem that they are facing there in Miami. We'll finish out today's episode by talking about the Orlando Magic. They have maybe the most work to do in this offseason of any of the teams in the Southeast Division. They have a coaching vacancy. Jamal Mosley fired after the season. They'll have to make decisions on which direction they want to go. What do they do with this core of Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bain, who they spent a lot of assets on last offseason? Jalen Suggs also making big money on his current contract. It feels like a lot of money for a team that underwhelmed in the postseason. The coach has now been fired. That's the first step, the first guy who's going to take the blame for everything that went down. But is there more reshaping to do around this Magic team? We'll see over the coming weeks. They only have pick 46 in this upcoming draft, so they won't be adding any talent through the first round, at least. The only really notable free agent, Mo Wagner, Jet Howard, also a free agent, but struggled to make an impact during his time with the team. So they can really focus in on how to reshape this thing, how to get things back on the right track. They struggle greatly on the offensive end. And so I think that the biggest hole that they have to fill is that connector. They've got to figure out who it's going to be. Obviously, they thought it was going to be Desmond Bain last offseason. He was good for them. He was not a bad acquisition by any means. But Derek, it feels like they really need, whether it's a point guard or just somebody who is a hub and brings those pieces together because they don't look cohesive right now on offense at all.
Yeah, the Mavericks can approach this from two different standpoints, and obviously they've somewhat already gone down the first standpoint, which is we're going to bring this back. We're going to bet that we weren't healthy enough to really get a real assessment, combined with our coach wasn't creative enough to put these pieces into the right place. So we'll just bring it all back, and if it doesn't work out next year, then because we now have a coach that we should believe in, if he can't get it to at least trend into some sort of real direction, well, then we'll have to start thinking about taking this apart in a more substantial manner. Or they can combine what they've done with firing Jamal Mosley with finally making the decision on what everyone is kind of dancing around, which is does Paulo Banchero or Franz Wagner, does one of them need to be moved either for a better superstar or excuse me, all-star piece or for a series of pieces that will more succinctly fit around one or the other. And to be honest, I'm not sure what direction they are going to go in because there's an argument for either one.
Right. I think that there's definitely that argument. I do think that they will push this out at least one more year with those two. Like you said, there were injuries. They can kind of excuse it away. They can at least convince themselves that we need a playmaker, somebody to be that connective piece between those two, probably at the point guard position, because you've really got them at the 3 and 4, Desmond Bain at the 2. Those places are pretty set. And I don't think that you're relying on a center to come in and bring cohesiveness to this group. So I think that it's got to be at the point guard spot that you're looking to overhaul things. I think, unfortunately for them, what they're going to run into is that they've got Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black on this team. Well, Anthony Black at times has looked like he has a lot of value. Do you stunt his growth by moving someone in ahead of him? It feels like at that point you might as well use him as one of the pieces to go get your guy that you think is going to be able to change things. And Jalen Suggs, with that big contract, he didn't really live up to it this past season. So, how much of a positive asset is he if you're going out to get the guy who you think can run your offense at that point guard spot? I think that they're in a really I don't think it's a bad spot because you've still got a young core. You've still got some pieces that you can move around. You don't have all of your pieces because of the Bane move, but I think that so much of it is going to come down to who is leading this team, who is the guy getting them into their offense, because I just don't see it from Paolo and Franz right now. We haven't seen it throughout their careers, any sort of coherent offensive plan that they've been able to put together. They're going to need somebody who can organize this offense, and that's going to come down to two people, the point guard and the coach. And so I don't know if we want to go through point guard targets or coaching targets. I'll let you choose which route we want to go down here to fix that problem.
I think the more important issue is my stance. Like, I don't think these coaches, besides the very top of the top, are that much different from each other. Usually it's a roster construction issue. And right now, the Magic have a roster construction issue. It's just about, is that issue fixed by being healthy, or is that issue fixed by making a small move? Is that issue fixed by making a big move? If you're asking me, which you are, figuring out the point guard situation is where they need to go. We need to think about point guard targets if we're the Magic,
Yeah.
because that's what's keeping this from connecting, along with maybe a little bit more shooting. But one of the things that I always get mad about when people are like, "Oh, add shooting." They make it seem like it's this easy thing to do, but there's two reasons why it's not easy. Being an elite shooter is very hard to be, so there's not that many of them. But also, being an elite shooter who can stay on the floor
Yes,
is
that's the big
also
thing.
very, very hard. And people always forget that part. You have to be able to defend your position in some realm or fashion, or there has to be enough around you to where that doesn't matter. And those are very hard things to construct.
Yeah, and we've seen a swing even more towards that defensive end. You've seen a lot of these guys who are just heaters on the offensive end of the floor. They can't stay on the floor, especially in the playoffs, which is where the Magic are going to be defined with this group now at this point. And you look at this market of point guards that could potentially be out there. There's not just an obvious target, whether it's on the free agent market or really even on the trade market. I don't see the immediate that's the point guard we have to get. And we've already talked about point guard needy teams already during our series of previews here. So I think it's going to be much more difficult than on paper it would be to just say, we got to go get a point guard. Let's go make it happen. They've got some real decisions to make. And the coaching piece, I think, is going to impact all of it. What kind of point guard you want to bring in. Obviously, does that coach come in with the goal of appeasing Paolo and Franz? Or are you bringing in somebody who's just going to run the ship their way and we're going to figure out if these guys are on board? There's multiple paths you can go down that route. And I think the obvious name that's going to be out there that's going to be thrown around until they hire someone is Billy Donovan. And it makes sense. A coach who took the Orlando Magic job years ago and ended up backing out at the last second. Still the same owner there. So is there still some hurt feelings? Does that get in the way of a deal getting done here? Or is it water under the bridge? That was what, 15 years ago now at this point, even more than that, maybe. So that's going to be the big talking point. Is Billy Donovan going to be the guy? But there's other coaches out there, a couple of retreads that could be in the mix, a couple of first time head coaches who you could go out and target. I think if I am them, there's one easy name, and it feels like he's not being talked about enough, and that's Tiago Splitter. If the if the Portland Trailblazers are going to lowball him and they're going to go out and make everyone else in the world $1 million a year offers instead of just sticking with the guy who really brought them into the playoffs and had them competitive against the San Antonio Spurs in disastrous circumstances, came in there as an assistant coach and the head coach is arrested, and now here he is running the ship, and he really made substantial changes throughout the season, something you don't see very often for NBA teams, and took a team that was known as a defense first. That was all they had. They were going to rely on their tough nose defense and what they had on that end of the floor. Well, they were coherent enough to make it into the playoffs and be competitive on the offensive end under Tiago Splitter. So he makes the most sense to me for a team that has been good defensively. They've shown you that they have the pieces on that end of the floor. Now it's about how do we get the most of those guys on the offensive end. I think Tiago Splitter would be a home run hire if they could go poach him from the other side of the country.
As you're laying out the Tiago Splitter case, my only, I guess, quote unquote concern, and as a Spurs fan, I'm not gonna hate on Tiago Splitter and the job he did. He did an excellent job in Portland, and I think he maximized what they could get out of that specific group. The only thing I will say is it wasn't exactly a creative offensive system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit unfair to hold that against him because he didn't have a training camp to install anything. He didn't have a ability to put in really his own ideas completely. If you get thrown that job in the middle of the season, it's just kind of unfair to ask that much of you, especially schematically. So there's a bit of a wait and see on that. But in terms of just what he got out of that offense this year, it's not so overwhelmingly more than what I would say Mosley got out of the Magic this year. But there are different circumstances to that. Mosley's
Mm-hmm.
had three. I made up a number. I don't know why I said a number at
It's
all. I
yeah,
don't know.
it's 5 years,
Don't
I
know
think.
how. Yeah, I don't know how many years he's had. I don't know why I was going to say a number. Anyway, he's had much more time to prove he's an offensively inept coach than Tiago would ever have had to prove because Tiago got thrown a job in basically the without a training camp. So that's the only thing I would say. But again, that would
and
be an interesting hire.
and on Tiago's background has been, at least in the coaching realm, has been offensive. Like he was
Right.
he was the guy who took over at Paris for Thomas Isolo and ran a very similar system to what Isolo was running. We know that Isolo, of course, came to the U.S. as this lauded international coach who had all these offensive ingenuities, the way that he uses screens to create space. Well, Tiago Splitter kind of took over that system and continued to run it with great success overseas. Then came similar path to the U.S. as an assistant. Both of them well, Isolo much later in the season than Splitter did, but took over as a head coach for that team that they came over as an assistant coach for. So he's from a pipeline that has been producing some solid offensive basketball. And so I'll be really interested to see. I think that that's a really good fit. Does it actually come to be? We will see. I mean, it feels like there hasn't been a lot of news out there about what the Orlando Magic's plan is for this head coaching position. They have time, so yeah, go test all the waters. I have no doubt that they would test some of these college coaches and see. There's quite a few of them. Todd Golden, Dusty May, already been mentioned throughout this year as potential guys who NBA teams could target. We know about Dan Hurley and the Lakers' pursuit of him over recent years. But I do think that with these college coaches, we might be too far down the line now to get something done. These guys have already built their rosters, and we're talking about coaches at the top of the game. They feel like they can win another championship. They've already put in all the work to get those guys on campus. I don't know if they're going to walk away now from the opportunity to win it all at the college level next season.
Could you imagine? You're a Detroit basketball fan, and you're down 3-1, and you came back, you recreated the whole T Mac situation, came back, won Game 7. Your prize for that is to maybe get eliminated in the second round, and then your flagship university loses its head coach because you eliminated the Orlando Magic in agonizing fashion. That would be an interesting
Yeah,
that'd be an interesting month for Detroit fans.
it'd be
I don't
yeah,
think that's
that'd
what's
be
going to happen, but it would
no,
be it would be
it would be very tough for them to swallow. This Magic team, just to kind of put a bow on it, they need shooting, they need ball handling, and they need a coach. They don't have a super clear path to go get those things, but that's what these GMs get paid a lot of money to do is figure it out and put the pieces together. We will be back with more off-season previews across the NBA over the next couple of weeks, all leading up to the NBA draft right here alongside Derek Lewis. Thanks for tuning in.